The fantasy football playoffs are just along the horizon, and it's not enough to just have a good starting lineup. We want to be over-prepared to take care of our league mates and make sure that we are the ones hoisting that fantasy football trophy at the end of the year. So today we're going to cover everything from how to line your bench with good handcuffs, which handcuffs we want to go after, quarterback streamers, defensive streamers, all that good stuff. All the moves that you need to make before the fantasy football playoffs. So before we get into it, if you guys enjoy at any point, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Bonus content down below in the link in the pinned comment if you're interested on Flock Fantasy. But with that being said, let's get into it. All right, so as I said in the intro, this video will consist of 3 parts. It'll be talking about stashing handcuffs in the first part, which will be the majority of this video, quarterback streamers, and defensive streamers. This exercise is all about upside because I'm sure if you guys are watching this video, you probably have either secured a playoff spot, or maybe you're looking ahead to the playoffs, or maybe you already have a bye or something like that. Your team is probably already quite good. It's probably well positioned to be one of the best teams in your league. But what we're doing now is going the extra mile. We're taking those extra 2 or 3 bench spots that we don't need, and we're going to drop those middling options that we're holding, like an Elijah Moore, Khalil Shakir type. Maybe you want to hold them for one more week if you have bye weeks this week. But for the most part, why we're doing this is because running backs are the only pieces that can see a huge upgrade in their role in value at this point in the season. By this point in the season, we kind of know who the breakout wide receivers are. We kind of know who the breakout tight ends and quarterbacks are. It's very rare that we're going to see an elite waiver wire ad that's not a running back come up at this point in the season or later. If you want to hold, your favorite rookie wide receiver or whatever for upside, I suppose that's fine. But today, I would primarily gear my bench stashes almost exclusively for backup running backs for handcuffs because this has a 2-pronged effect. Number one, you may be in possession of a league winner to use in your lineups during the fantasy football playoffs. And if you think this, no guy's just going to come out of nowhere like that, my home league in 2021, the last time I won it, I had Rashad Penny, Darrell Williams, and Sony Michel in my lineup the week of the fantasy football championship. All of those guys were handcuff running backs that I talked about in week 12's video when I did this the first time, mustache players for the fantasy playoffs. And all of those guys ended up being league winning options, especially Rashad Penny that year. So that's the main reason why we're doing this. We want to have those league winners on our bench in case we need to use them during the fantasy playoffs or the fantasy championship. Number 2 reason why you want to do this is because even if your team is stacked and you don't need to use that running back 2 that pops up on your bench because you stashed that handcuff, you can at least block your league mates from picking up those players on the waiver wire, so it becomes a win-win situation. Either you get to use them or your league mates don't get to use them, and thus that's why they're on your roster, and that's why we want to pick our handcuffs carefully. So now what we're going to do in this video is rank all of the handcuffs in the NFL, assuming that every known starting running back went down with injury. What would the priority be that we would place on their backups? Who would be the RB1s? Who would be the, high-end RB2 options? Who would be just volume plays, but, you could use them in your flex? And who is not really overly valuable? So during this exercise, what you guys should be doing watching this is seeing how many spots you can spare on your bench. Maybe if you have a 6 bench spot league and you can, maybe spare 2 or 3 bench spots to stash handcuffs, that's kind of what you want to gear yourself towards. And then as I'm going through this list, you want to check your waiver wires and see who's available in your league. If the top guy that I talk about isn't available, then you move down to the next guy, so on and so forth until you get to a guy that is available and you can stash that player and he could potentially be a league winner. The one thing I want to mention real quick off the top is that these backfields that you guys can see on the screen will not have any stashes coming from them because in these backfields, we don't really have a clear starter. Say, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, neither of them is really the starting running back. They're both kind of involved to an equal degree. Of course, if Najee Harris got hurt, Jaylen Warren could be a league winner and vice versa, but Warren is more than a handcuff. He's a usable option right now, and there's a good chance he's rostered anyway. So I'm only covering backfields today that have a clear starter. We know who it is, and we know who the backup is for the most part as well. Some of these guys are fine stashes, though, in the not included list, say Antonio Gibson, for example. But let's get things kicked off with the list itself. Let's start it off with the guys that if their starter went down, would be RB1s. We know that these guys have the peripherals to be RB1s for one reason or another. Maybe it's their workload, like we've seen when their starter has been out previously this season or in previous seasons. Maybe they're just uber talented, so if they walked into big workloads, they would be really good with them. And maybe they are also in great offenses who can help propel them forward. So the first guy that I have listed here is basically the RB1 if we nuked every starting running back around the league, is Zach Charbonnet, who we just saw last night in his 2 full healthy games so far without Kenneth Walker. We've seen him play 85% of the snaps or more in both games, and then last night he finally found the end zone. Now that he's banged up and Kenneth Walker should be back soon, monitor your waiver wire to see if anybody drops Zach Charbonnet either next week or the week after, because in my opinion, he tops the list as the best handcuff in fantasy. So you're definitely going to want to make sure that if you're not using him or if he doesn't become very relevant over the next week or two with Kenneth Walker coming back, he's still a good stash in your league. So monitor your waiver wire in case people drop him. Tyler Algier is the second-rated handcuff on this list. He has not seen any workhorse usage this year because Bijan hasn't really missed any games, but we did see something come up in week 7 when Bijan Robinson was barely active with a headache. Algier saw 24 opportunities in that game, 21 carries and 3 targets. We know that he would be a workhorse in Arthur Smith's offense if Bijan were to ever miss time. So Tyler Algier is also one of the premier stashes that you want to throw at the end of your bench in case Bijan Robinson were to get hurt down the stretch. Another additional thing with him is that Bijan's playoff schedule is so good that if Algier were to take over that playoff schedule, that would be great news for him as well. Zach Moss, I have listed here as the third best handcuff. He is the safest bet that requires 0 projection because we've already seen it so far this year. And again, I'm not ranking these guys based on what they are right now, because obviously right now, Zach Moss would be number 1 on this list because he's currently being used because Jonathan Taylor is not on the field for the next 2 to 3 games after he gets surgery on his finger or whatever it is. So with Zach Moss, we know that he went over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the 4 games that were without Jonathan Taylor this season. So he is one of the premier handcuffs in fantasy, and we're actually going to get to use him here now at this moment, which is why he's so highly rostered at this point in time. But again, a couple weeks from now, if Jonathan Taylor's back on the field, he might get dropped and you want to stash him at that point in time. So Rico Dowdle, another guy that is a very good handcuff option that we haven't actually seen in his handcuff role yet because Tony Pollard hasn't missed any games. But should Tony Pollard go down, you have a guy who's been very productive. He ranks very, very highly as a runner and a receiver on PFF. You have an elite offense with the Dallas Cowboys, a team that's putting up a lot of points. They just scored like 40 points last night. And a guy that probably projects to get a big workload should Pollard go down with an injury. So Rico Dowdle, definitely a must-stash handcuff, could be a league winner down the stretch. And I could see him definitely being a guy that cracks starting lineups in the fantasy playoffs if anything happened to Pollard. Jerick McKinnon, another guy that we've seen in the past be a very strong handcuff. We've seen 2 games out of him last year where he had over 35 snaps dating back to last year's fantasy playoffs in week 14 and week 15. If you guys recall, what happened there was that Clyde Edwards-Helaire went down. Isaiah Pacheco was just a rookie, so he didn't really work into the backfield a whole lot. And Jerick McKinnon was the RB1 overall in week 14, the RB1 overall in week 15, and we saw more fantasy usable games in week 16 and week 17 at the end of the year. So if Isaiah Pacheco went down this season, Jerick McKinnon would absolutely have a good chance to take over that pass catching role and get more groundwork and potentially be a league winner yet again for that Kansas City Chiefs offense. So finally, in this top tier of guys that would be RB1s if their starter went down, we have Tajay Spears, who ranks as a top 20 runner and a top 20 receiver at the running back position in the NFL. He's a rookie running back from Tulane. He is averaging over 5.5 yards per touch, over 5 yards per carry. If Derrick Henry went down, I have no doubt in my mind that Tajay Spears would be a back-end RB1 with a solid workload and great pass catching upside for a very talented player. It's not a great offense, but I think he could get there based on talent and workload alone. So that basically closes out the top end RB1s tier. Again, if all of those guys are rostered, then we want to move down to this tier and stash some of these guys. That's basically what we're doing with this exercise, and you could come back to this video 2 weeks from now after some of these guys have maybe been dropped and you want to get ready for the fantasy playoffs in week 15 when they actually start. The tier 2 running backs here, the high-end RB2s with upside, I have them all listed there. A lot more guys that are widely available in terms of their ownership percentage, so some of these guys definitely available to be stashed at the end of your bench right now. With Dearness Johnson, who I have ranked the highest of this group, he has recently taken over as the number 2 running back in Jacksonville. Jacksonville's a good offense. They can put up points, and Travis Etienne is actually currently banged up right now, so we have a real chance that Dearness Johnson might actually get some usable weeks. upcoming in the fantasy playoffs. And we know with Dearness Johnson from his Cleveland days that Johnson can command a big workload. We saw when Nick Chubb was out back when he was with Cleveland, he commanded a huge workload, commanded a lot of carries, commanded some targets as well. So Dearness Johnson has really rapidly moved himself up the pecking order in terms of handcuff running backs I want to stash. Elijah Mitchell, if you told me he was going to get the big workload that Christian McCaffrey gets, I would say he probably is the number 1 or 2 kind of running back in this top tier. But I believe that Jordan Mason would be heavily involved if Christian McCaffrey were to go down. So you find Elijah Mitchell here more so as like a high-end RB2 in this top-tier offense that he plays for with a solid workload, but he's not quite to the level of Elijah Mitchell handcuff seasons of years past because Jordan Mason is involved, and I think he absolutely would be if Christian McCaffrey were to miss any time. Then we have Kareem Hunt. Jerome Ford, believe it or not, is actually a clear starter in terms of a snap share right now, but Kareem Hunt would absolutely be solid without Jerome Ford if he were to get injured. Ezekiel Elliott, we know he can handle work if Ramondre ever went down. It's a bad offense, but I think given that Ezekiel Elliott's been moderately efficient this year, I think we could see a big 3-down workload if Ramondre were to go down. So he makes for a decent stash as well. Kenneth Gainwell, it's a great offense. We know DeAndre Swift isn't the poster child for health either, and Kenneth Gainwell can catch. So he is definitely the type of guy that you'd want to stash, especially considering the offense that he plays for. We could see the Eagles really sun run the rest of the season, and if DeAndre Swift happens to be out of the lineup for that, then we could see a big-time performance out of Kenneth Gainwell in that time, but we probably would see, Rashad Penny and Boston Scott working a little bit. So he's not quite into that top-tier level for me just yet. Zamir White, not convinced that he's all that good. I'm not a huge fan of Zamir White, the talent, but I do think given how that Josh Jacobs' role is, give him 20 carries each and every game, I think that Zamir White would just walk right into those carries if Josh Jacobs were to be out, and that would make him a high-end RB2 with touchdown upside each and every week, so he also makes sense, a very widely available guy that you could easily stash right now and just burn a bench spot on. And then Ty Chandler is the guy that closes out this year. We never got to see him without Alexander Mattison. There was a point in time where he looked like he was going to be a good handcuff option, but Alexander Mattison never missed any games with that concussion, so we never got to see that. But he did command 15 carries in the game that Mattison went down in and left early in week 10 with that concussion. So I do think Ty Chandler would probably end up being a pretty good option should Mattison miss any time down the stretch. And then finally, I'll just kind of rattle off these last 2 tiers of running backs. The tier 3 running backs, these guys would simply be volume plays. I'm not convinced that any of them are all that good. I'm not convinced that any of their offenses would really propel them. And also, more importantly, I think that if their starter went down, there would be another running back that would be involved to some degree, to the point that it wouldn't make any of these guys like elite workhorse caliber dudes. Like, for example, if Javonte Williams went down, Samaje Perine would be the lead back, but Jaleel McLaughlin would work in. If we've seen Aaron Jones miss a number of games here. AJ Dillon's had 16, 10, 21, 17, and 18 opportunities in those games, but they have used other running backs in the Green Bay backfield. With Royce Freeman, again, if Kyron Williams went down, we would assume that Darrell Henderson would probably be brought up from the practice squad and be involved yet again. Latavius Murray, if James Cook went down, I'm assuming Leonard Fournette would be active on game days and he would work on into this backfield. So that's why I just have Latavius Murray as a volume RB2. Dalvin Cook just stinks at this point in time, and so does the Jets offense. So, you take the talent level of Breece Hall out of this backfield, and I'm not convinced that this role is all that valuable. Same goes with Josh Kelly. You take the talent level of Austin Eckler out of that backfield and the receiving ability that he has. Josh Kelly pretty much stinks. He had 14, 12, and 17 opportunities when Eckler was out earlier this season, 60% opportunity share and 60% snap share in all 3 of those games, but he didn't really do anything with it. So I'm not excited about Josh Kelly. Jamal Williams, we had a 1-game sample size of Alvin Kamara out of the lineup before Jamal Williams got hurt in week 2, and Jamal Williams had a 77% snap share in that game. So we got the workload, but now that Kendre Miller is a bigger part of the fold of this backfield, I don't think that Jamal Williams would suddenly be a workhorse should Kamara go down with injury. And then the tier 4 running backs, DeMercado, Travion Williams, Matt Breida, and Keyshawn Vaughn, these guys just simply wouldn't be very valuable, so I probably wouldn't stash any of them. You're probably better off stashing a rookie wide receiver like Jalen Hyatt or something at that point in time, because they'd probably be higher upside options. So that is the handcuff report, basically. And how, like I said, how you guys want to use that is just go down the list, see what guys are available. How many bench spots can you afford to stash players on? Maybe you can only afford to stash one of these guys. Maybe you can only afford to stash 2 or 3 of these guys. go through the exercise, go through the handcuffs. And again, they're kind of in tier list formats. So just because I have, let's say, Zach Charbonnet as the number one handcuff in the tier 1 running backs, doesn't mean he actually is the best one. Maybe you prefer Algier, maybe you prefer Zach Moss, or you prefer Rico Dowdle. Whatever the case is, just whoever's available in those tiers are the guys that you're going to want to stash for sure. So moving on to the defensive streamers. So if you guys are stashing defenses to stream in the fantasy playoffs because you need, a better defensive option than you currently have, maybe the defense that you currently have doesn't have very good playoff matchups, what I would recommend doing is only stashing one additional defense over the one that you're starting. So I wouldn't get cute and just look at the best matchup in week 15, the best matchup in week 16, and the best matchup in week 17, and then stash one individual defense for each of those games. That's probably not what I would do. I would rather stash a handcuff and only burn one additional bench spot on a defense. So for me, if you guys are looking for defenses that have good schedules throughout the entirety of the fantasy playoffs, my favorite would be the Los Angeles Rams. They play the Commanders, Saints, and Giants. None of those defenses or those offenses scare me, so I think the Rams are a great option. The Atlanta Falcons play the Panthers, the Colts, and the Bears. None of those offenses really scare you either, so I think they're a good option to stash throughout the entirety. And then the Kansas City Chiefs, they're probably rostered because they've been good all year. The New England Patriots, Raiders, and Bengals, all very, very good options there as well. Same goes with the Green Bay Packers defense. You guys can see that they have the Buccaneers, the Panthers, and the Vikings. Minus the Vikings in week 17, those are all pretty good options. So maybe you want to stash some of the defenses that I just mentioned there. And then if you guys are streaming the quarterback position, you don't have like a steady Josh Allen, Justin Herbert type of quarterback, and you're looking for the type of quarterback that can carry you into the fantasy playoffs. I do think that Dak, Purdy, Justin Fields, and Kyler Murray, those guys are the best options given their schedules, but they're probably all rostered at this point in time because they're all great options. My favorite streamers that should be widely available in your leagues, if you're looking for, just playing the matchups at the quarterback position, Russell Wilson has some great matchups, the Lions, the Patriots, and the Chargers. Geno Smith has some great matchups as well with the Eagles, the Titans, and the Steelers, particularly the Eagles and Titans to start that off. And then Matthew Stafford also has some good matchups with the Commanders, Saints, and Giants. All of those defenses are exploitable. So if you're looking for quarterback streamers, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, and Matthew Stafford seem to be the best options in my opinion. So if you got some value from this video, if I helped you guys get prepared for your fantasy football playoff runs, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. If you have any questions, any comments, leave them down below in the comments section as well. While you're down there, make sure to check out our site, flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE for 30% off any of our packages. Monthly signups are a good deal right now, and as well, you can get an annual package for 6 months for free if you sign up over there on Flock using the promo code FSE. And of course, when you sign up annually, you're going to get access to all of the great tools, all of the great content from us, all of your other favorite Dynasty and redraft fantasy football creators. If you guys are especially, particularly redraft players looking to maybe try out Dynasty this offseason, I would highly recommend signing up for an annual subscription because you can then use a consult with us for free. And, we can help you during your startup draft, or we can help you once your startup is over, and we can help you make some moves and all that good stuff. So if that interests you, definitely check that out down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.